216 horsepower, 330 Newton meters of torque, and the ability to travel up to 485 kilometers, while still being suspiciously more affordable. Say hello to the BYD Seal 6. Now, despite the confusing naming convention, the BYD Seal 6 actually sits underneath the BYD Seal that we're already very familiar with, which is why under the skin you get a 56 kilowatt hour battery, which according to BYD is able to power this car up to 485 kilometers on the NEDC cycle, which means realistically expect about 410. In terms of charging, this car will accept 6.6 kilowatts AC, which means a dead to full charge takes a little bit over 9 hours, whereas in terms of DC charging, this car will accept 100 kilowatts, which means that a 30 to 80% charge takes about 23 to 26 minutes, which is all very good for those who might want to travel with their new BYD Saloon. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the BYD Seal 6 sits underneath the BYD Seal, which means that this car is overall a little bit more compact. However, despite that, BYD is touting several class-leading numbers. For example, this car is apparently the tallest, widest, and longest vehicle in its class, and it sits on the longest wheelbase, which they say promises not only greater space and practicality for buyers, but it also means that this car should be relatively dynamic. Dynamics is also another part that BYD is emphasizing here, because this car is rear-wheel driven, and it carries a suspension tune that is unique to the Malaysian market, taking feedback that they've received from customers here and tuning newer models like this to better fit our taste. Now, in terms of rolling stock, this car sits on a set of Westar alloy wheels. The alloy wheels themselves are painted in grey. Those Westar tires are not exactly the best performers, as we've seen from the Atto 2, and I've no doubt that many customers will be swapping them out quite quickly. In terms of the design, the front end of this car shares many similarities between the Atto 2 and Atto 3, thanks to the very significant blade design in the front, as well as those two full LED headlights, as well as the full width LED light bar. As we come down the side, although this car is again billed as a Seal, the overall design and the profile of this car is very different compared to the Seal that we're familiar with a much more cabin forward design as expected from a slightly more compact vehicle. One key differentiator between the Seal and the Seal 6 are the flip-up type door handles, which BYD normally reserves for the slightly more affordable models, but I do appreciate the fact that as the car comes down, or as the roofline comes down towards the rear, it does resolve itself quite neatly with this ducktail spoiler. That ducktail spoiler sits on top of a set of full LED taillights, repeat with an LED light bar, and a signature that is very similar to what we've seen from the Atto 2, which does bring a lot of that familial resemblance to the rear. However, there is something about this view that reminds me a little bit of a Renault Megane saloon. Anyway, there is a faux diffuser down there, but as far as I'm concerned, the back end of this car does seem to be pretty well resolved, at least for a vehicle that is competing within the C segment, and so this is relatively positive. Now, behind the tailgate, you will find 460 liters of space, which is certainly large enough for 5 people's worth of luggage without any issue at all. Most importantly, this opening is quite large for a saloon with a very small load lip, despite the fact that this car is rear-wheel driven. And even though there is, again, a motor mounted between the two rear wheels, there is still space underneath the boot floor for your charging cables as well as your emergency kit, which means that that doesn't gum up space in here, and of course you can fold the rear seat 60-40 for added practicality. Now, if you want even more space, they've also managed to fit in a 65-litre boot underneath the bonnet, which means that if you have smelly, stinky, dirty items, you can put it in there. And if I'm not mistaken, there should also be a drain plug, which means that you might be able to just hose it out. Pretty practical. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Seal 6 sits below the Seal, which means that this interior has also been appointed to a slightly more approachable level, which is why, for example, the material quality in here is not up to par with what we saw from the Seal and the Sea Lion 7. However, compared to other C-segment vehicles, it is pretty good. Lots of soft touch materials about the place, lots of nice stitching, and more importantly, at points where you will interact with the car most often, places like the dash front, as well as this particular part of the door card, this is all very nice, very plush material with plenty of real stitching. So this will most certainly make this car feel like a more upmarket proposition than its price might suggest. Now, in terms of technology, there is the usual gamut of features in here. A screen about 12.8 inches. It doesn't rotate here, which is great because that was a gimmick at best, and it does come with wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Most importantly, however, this screen still uses the same operating system that we've seen from other BYD models, which means that in terms of the overall usability, functionality, and reaction time, it's all pretty good. This is exactly what we want to see from a system like this, particularly when you're going to be using it most of the time and when it controls the majority of the car's functions. Now, in addition to this screen, there is also a digital instrument cluster up front, which is obviously taken from vehicles like the C-Line 7 and the Seal, which means that it is a decently sized display with all the information that you need displayed in a manner that is very easy for you to get along with. That's great, particularly because the fact that this car is not available with a heads-up display. Moving further down, there's a 50-watt wireless charger, and that brings us on to practicality. Couple of cup holders here, decently sized center console bin, decently sized glove box here as well, unfortunately not lined in felt, and decently sized door bin, certainly large enough for a 1.5 litre size bottle. There's also space underneath the center console for more stuff, but one of the little attention to detail elements in here that I do quite like is the fact that these central vents and the vents on the side are all manual, but more importantly, these vents can actually be pushed down in order to cool a device that might be charging wirelessly here. Another thing that I do quite like is the fact this car comes with a sunglasses holder as well as a full-size panoramic sunroof with the front portion openable, which is, I believe, a first for this segment. And unlike the BYD Seal, BYD has learned their lesson. And so this panoramic sunroof comes as standard with an electric sunblind, which is great because without one, this car would have been quite cack. Now, with this seat set up in my driving position via this 8-way powered adjustable seat, 4-way for the passenger, by the way, that 2.8 meter long wheelbase really pays dividends because you can see I have a huge amount of knee room, and despite that electric sunroof, a pretty decent amount of headroom. So this is all pretty good. However, as you can no doubt observe by now, because this car is a saloon, the battery has forced the floor to be quite high, so I don't have that much in terms of under-thigh support. And if the person in front of me is not perched up high enough, there would be very little space for me to tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me. Now, in terms of everything else, material quality back here is just as good as it is in the front. No changes here at all soft touch, which we love to see. On top of that, practicality is also pretty good because you've got a couple of cup holders here via this deployable center armrest. You've got pockets behind the front seats, decently sized door bins, a USB-C and USB-A port back here, as well as a couple of crotch coolers. Again, all very positive. Now, one of the things about this back end that I'm not a big fan of is the fact that it is quite dark. Despite the fact this car comes with a glass roof, because of the black and grey interior panels in here, it does feel a little bit gloomy. And if you were to tint this car, I can only imagine that it will only get worse. On top of that, because the ISOFIX mounts are mounted back here and without one available in the front, it does also mean that if you do have a child seat here, this relatively high belt line might result in a higher propensity of car sickness, as the small children may struggle to get a view out. Although, then again, you still have that glass roof, so that's certainly nice after all. In terms of safety, the BYD Seal 6 is pretty well equipped with the usual gamut of level 2 semi-autonomy features that you'd expect within a car like this, particularly one that carries that BYD badge, which means that this car comes with AEB, traffic jam assist, adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitoring, rear cross traffic alert, and a fantastic 360 camera, as we've seen before from BYD, among a variety of other things, which is exactly what you want from a car that will ultimately be considered a family vehicle. The BYD Seal 6 EV has just launched at 100,000 ringgit for the entry-level model, rising to 115,800 ringgit for the flagship variant. All cars come as standard with a BYD warranty, and there is a value-add package worth just under 7,000 ringgit for early bird customers. And so that concludes our coverage of the new BYD Seal 6 EV. Let us know in the comment section below what you think about this car, and more importantly, how you feel that this car stacks up against vehicles like the Toyota Corolla Altis, as well as the Honda Civic, as well as other price competitors. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you hit the link in the description below, you can also join our new WhatsApp channel so that you'll never miss an update from the Malaysian automotive industry. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you next one. Take care and stay safe.